The Martinez family was once a portrait of happiness. Now, they were a fractured reflection of their former selves. The father, Ricardo, carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. His once booming laughter was now reduced to weary sighs. His wife, Isabella, moved through their small home like a ghost. Her eyes, once filled with warmth, were now clouded with worry. Their daughter, Eleanor, was the epicenter of their despair. A darkness had settled over her. She was once a vibrant young woman with a contagious laugh. Now her laughter had been replaced by blood-curdling screams. Her eyes, once sparkling with life, were now vacant and distant. They lived in a small town where whispers traveled faster than the wind. The townspeople, once their friends and neighbors, now looked at them with suspicion and fear. The Martinez family was a house divided, held together by the thin threads of love and desperation. Their once happy home had become a battleground. Elena's outbursts were becoming more frequent, more violent. They were losing their daughter and they were losing themselves. Desperate for answers, they sought help from doctors, therapists, anyone who would listen. Doctors offered diagnoses but no solutions. Therapists listened patiently, but their words rang hollow. Elena's condition worsened. Despair clung to the Martinez family like a shroud. One evening, as Ricardo sat alone in the flickering candlelight, a neighbor visited. Mrs. Garcia, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a knowing gaze, spoke in hushed tones. She spoke of ancient forces, of spirits that could possess the living. She spoke of a man, a curandero, who lived on the outskirts of town, a man who could communicate with the other side. Ricardo, a man of logic and reason, scoffed at the suggestion, but desperation gnawed at his heart. He had exhausted all other options. He was a drowning man, and Mrs. Garcia offered him a lifeline, however flimsy it may seem. That night, Ricardo shared Mrs. Garcia's story with Isabella. Her initial reaction was disbelief, but as they looked at their daughter, who thrashed and screamed in her bed, a flicker of hope ignited in their eyes. Maybe, just maybe, this was the answer to their prayers. The curandero's home was a small ramshackle hut on the edge of town. The air hung heavy with the scent of incense and herbs. The curandero, a wizened old man with piercing eyes, greeted them with a knowing smile. He examined Elena, his touch surprisingly gentle. He spoke of a dark entity, a malevolent spirit that had taken root in their daughter's soul. He spoke of a ritual, an exorcism that could drive the spirit away. Ricardo and Isabella, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and fear, agreed. The ritual was set for the following night. The curandero led them into a small, dimly lit room. The air crackled with an unseen energy. Elena was placed in the center of the room, surrounded by candles. The curandero began to chant in a language they didn't understand. The air grew thick, suffocating. The candles flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Elena thrashed and screamed, her voice inhuman, guttural. Ricardo and Isabella watched in horror, their hope turning to ashes in their mouths. The room seemed to spin. The chanting grew louder, more intense. Elena's screams pierced their eardrums, their hearts. Time lost all meaning. They were trapped in a nightmare, a descent into the abyss. Days blurred into nights. The ritual continued, each night more terrifying than the last. The curandero's chants became a constant presence, echoing in their ears even in the silence. Elena's screams were like shards of glass piercing their souls. They were prisoners in their own home, held captive by fear and the unknown. Strange occurrences plagued the house. Objects moved on their own. Whispers seemed to emanate from the walls. Shadows danced at the edge of their vision. They were living in a waking nightmare, their sanity hanging by a thread. Ricardo and Isabella were exhausted, their bodies and spirits broken. They clung to the curandero's words. his promises that he was weakening the entity, that Elena would soon be free. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. The rituals were growing increasingly disturbing. The curandero's methods more and more extreme. Their once unwavering faith in his abilities began to crumble. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Section 5. A web of lies, the witch doctor's grip. Ricardo, his mind weary but his instincts screaming, began to notice discrepancies. The curandero always insisted on being paid in cash, large sums that were draining their savings. His pronouncements about the entity seemed rehearsed, lacking the conviction of their first meeting. He started seeing the curandero not as a savior but as a predator, weaving a web of lies around them. One night, as the curandero prepared for the ritual, Ricardo confronted him. He accused him of being a fraud, of preying on their desperation. The curandero, his eyes flashing with anger, denied everything. He dismissed Ricardo's concerns as the ravings of a desperate father blinded by grief. But Ricardo refused to be silenced. He threatened to expose the curandero, to tell the authorities about his fraudulent practices. A chilling smile spread across the curandero's face. He leaned close to Ricardo, his voice a low hiss. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he whispered. "This goes far beyond your understanding. You're in too deep." Ricardo, his blood running cold, realized he had made a grave mistake. He had underestimated the curandero's reach, his ruthlessness. The curandero, his eyes gleaming with malice, produced a vial filled with a dark liquid. "This," he hissed, "will silence your doubts forever." Before Ricardo could react, the curandero forced the vial to Isabella's lips. She choked and sputtered, her eyes wide with terror. Ricardo watched in horror as his wife, his love, collapsed to the floor. The curandero stood over her, his expression cold and calculating. "Now," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "the ritual can continue." Ricardo, paralyzed by grief and fear, could only watch as the curandero turned his attention back to Elena. The chanting resumed, louder and more frantic than before. But Ricardo was no longer focused on saving his daughter. His mind was consumed by a single burning desire: revenge. Fueled by rage and grief, Ricardo waited for his opportunity. As the curandero was engrossed in his chanting, Ricardo grabbed a heavy candlestick and struck him from behind. The curandero cried out, collapsing to the floor. The chanting ceased, replaced by an eerie silence. Elena lay still, her chest rising and falling in a normal rhythm. For the first time in weeks, she looked like their daughter. Ricardo rushed to her side, checking for a pulse, a sign of life. She was alive. But Isabella? He knelt beside his wife's lifeless body, his heart shattering into a million pieces. As the police swarmed the house, drawn by Elena's screams, a gruesome discovery was made. The vial the curandero had forced Isabella to drink contained a potent poison. The curandero wasn't exorcising demons. He was silencing anyone who dared to expose his web of lies, his exploitation of the vulnerable. The Martinez family had been victims of a con man, a predator masquerading as a savior. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the town was consumed by guilt and remorse. The Martinez family, once ostracized and feared, became a symbol of their collective blindness. The whispers now carried a different tune, one of sympathy and regret. But for Ricardo and Elena, the damage was irreparable. Ricardo, haunted by guilt and grief, struggled to care for his daughter. Elena, though physically unharmed, was a shell of her former self. The trauma of the past weeks had left an indelible mark on her psyche. Their home, once filled with laughter and love, was now a constant reminder of their loss. The silence was deafening, broken only by Elena's occasional nightmares. They were both trapped in their own personal hells, forever bound by the shared tragedy. They went through the motions of living, but the joy, the light, had vanished from their lives. They were left with nothing but the echoes of loss. As the months turned into years, the whispers about the Martinez family faded. Life in the town returned to a semblance of normalcy. But for Ricardo and Elena, the nightmare was far from over. The fear lingered, a constant shadow in their lives. They moved to a new town, hoping to outrun the memories, but the past had a way of catching up. Elena suffered from panic attacks, her sleep plagued by nightmares. She refused to speak of the witch doctor, the rituals, the terror that gripped their lives. Ricardo, consumed by guilt, blamed himself for what happened. He should have seen the signs, should have protected his family. The weight of his failure crushed him, driving a wedge between him and his daughter. They were both trapped, not by a malevolent spirit, but by the chains of their shared trauma. The haunting of the Martinez family wasn't about demonic possession. It was about the darkness that can reside in the human heart, the desperation that can blind us to the truth. It was a haunting that would follow them to their graves, a chilling reminder that some wounds never truly heal.